So, David, glad to be chatting with you as a member of the fixed roster, The Plague. And to kick things off, want to dive right into the origins of the name. Where did the plague come from? And then tie that into just musical origins. Want to kind of see where you got your roots from and where the plague came from.
Oh, man, a lot to bite off and chew there. So, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you in this format. And thanks for the opportunity to release music with you under the name The Plague. It's very kind and generous, and I appreciate it.
We love it.
I wanted something that would be a biblical reference, but also I pictured that it was a futuristic plague that sort of like nanobots coming to attack people as technology got out of control and became a plague in society. So there's a sense of when there used to be horror movies, rather than being like the heroes that defeat the aliens from outer space, the movie was called The Aliens from Outer Space. So I pictured the plague was actually what the music was fighting against. Sort of rather than being like, we're the plague, we are fighting against the plague. And then there's a sense of I wanted it to be a pun. In my daily life, I tell a lot of puns. It's sort of my sense of humor. So I wanted it to be catching on like the plague, or, you know, stuff like that, get infected by the plague.
Yeah.
So it hit the spiritual level, the pun level. And then we actually went through, we being the bandmates at the time, and I, at the time of the origin, it was me and my friend Oren Hoffman. We actually came up with the visuals. We knew that we wanted the band to be futuristic rock, and we came up with a bunch of visuals, and The Plague was the first name, first in line to be chosen. But we came up with a bunch of other names and kind of just threw them through our like test process of what the visuals were. And
Yeah.
there were some that were really cool, but I kind of had it going for The Plague the whole time, so we stuck with it.
Awesome. What about, where in the musical journey did the plague begin? What year or so roughly? And then we can go further back
Oh
to kind of where you
man.
first got into music.
Oh yeah. Well, there was a period where I was producing bands. That was a good almost decade of my life. So a lot of that took place in Boston. I owned a studio in Somerville, and we would fly bands from all over the world in, and they would come record their records. There was a big learning curve for me. It was funny because we ended up actually doing surprisingly a lot of folk music, very organic stuff, but also then rock. I came from a rock background. I was in a pop punk band for a decade before that, and there was a lot of variety that came through the studio. And while I was learning all these different things that I liked from all these different artists, almost like assimilating a lot of their attitudes and their vibes, their pros and their cons. I would tend to have a process that I would stamp a band pretty significantly as sounding like they came from my studio or from my collaboration. And it helped me learn a bit about who I was independently, but also to glean a lot from all these other artists. And as that process kept on going about, every time we'd be talking to bands about what their names were and what their marketing was and what their vision was, and to their labels about who they wanted to sound like. Like a big thing that labels would do is they'd be like, can you make this band sound like X? And I hated that. I wanted to figure out who an artist was and make it unique, even if it gleans from stuff. Everyone has their influences, but that's slightly different than trying to cut someone off at the knees in order to shove them into a certain lane.
Totally.
So through that whole process, the Plague kind of just evolved. I'm like, man, I love fuzz guitars. Man, I love playing guitar. Smashing Pumpkins is like my biggest guitar influence, probably. Billy Corgan and James Iha. And then there was like a lot of alternative that I just loved. And I was kind of messing around with some different alternative bands that came through, and we found some things that we both had in common there. There was a band that came through that had all these epic pads. They wanted to be like Tears for Fears, so they kept on pushing. We want oohs and ahs in the background, but can they be fake? They wanted them to be fake. They couldn't be real, and it created this very eerie, ethereal texture. And I was like, "Ooh, I like that." I kept grabbing things from all these bands until eventually something came together in my head where I'm like, "This is what my goal is."
Were there any bands that you worked with in that era that you want to shout out by name, or anything that was like really memorable?
Yeah, I'd rather leave it because there's a couple bands that would be the ones that I would want to name to establish some credibility, but they're also the ones that I don't want to name because of the interpersonal things that took place. It was part of the reason why I stopped producing bands. There's one in particular that I'm thinking that was the straw that broke the camel's back. They came in and they mocked my manager significantly. They were very, very arrogant. The whole thing was an uphill battle. And I guess some people are made out, maybe some producers are made for that type of thing, but it wasn't about the music. It was about egos and how they could get more attention. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore if this is the direction that things are going. It took a year or two to finally settle down and to actually move past that experience. But that would probably be the band that most people would recognize if I referenced. So I'd rather not.
Totally
I'd rather
fair.
not throw them under the bus.
Totally fair.
No.
You strike a point there that we, at FiXT over 18 years now, we have made a point to, like, we're not interested in signing rock stars, just like egos that we have to walk on eggshells, and like we have values and standards, and some of that is like how they're going to interact and treat our team and us. And so totally feel you on that.
Yeah. And it's a difficult walk to walk because as much as I tried to make judgment calls around that value when I was younger and in my 20s, I on some level felt that I was actually bargaining something that I was owed. Like, if I'm a good person like this, then of course I'm going to get all this stuff. So it was still an element of like, was I really doing it because it was the right thing to do, or was it a mix of the right thing to do, but also I thought I was still going to have certain things pan out a certain way for me. And over time, as a Christian, like, God's really been working that out in me. Like, what's my actual motivation to purify things? Because I think that people, especially, I can speak for myself. I'm a bit more complicated than just good or bad a lot of the time. So,
aren't we all?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I thought of one. So you might know Danny Case from the band From Ashes to New.
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah, I produced his band before that, where and during the process of them of him talking to From Ashes to New about being their singer, supported him a bit through that. I was sort of helped get his pre From Ashes to New career. I was a figure in that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You also know, I forgot that you knew them. You also know another artist that has worked with FiXT, David from the Bad Dreamers. And I don't know if I ever fully understood how you guys knew each other.
Well, we come from the same stomping grounds. We grew up in the same town in upstate New York, and we were somewhere between like peers cheering each other on and then like rival bands. So my band, Third Estate, from 2000, very early 2000s, we were a Warped Tour band, which means that was like our main staple to the music industry. We got on the tour because of a local promoter that saw our band play. And then there was this other band that also was from the area that also got on the tour through the same promoter. And they were called One Year Nothing, and then they changed their name to the Sunstreak. And as our band, Third Estate, faded away, they assimilated our drummer at the time, and that sort of added to the rivalry, but camaraderie, at the same time. and Dave Schuler joined the Sunstreak, and then that's when they did their whole Warped Tour stint. They got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for independently sold albums and all this stuff. And so, yeah, we knew each other through that whole era. And then he went on to work with Pink and a few other people. And during that era, not only was he a very cool person to talk to, but he came and he did sound for us at one of our reunion shows and stuff like that. So we're sort of, it appears is the best way to describe us. We've run in the same circles for quite a long time.
Small world, for sure.
Yeah, it is. Especially because so many people that were professionals from upstate New York, when we were professionals when we were very young, a lot of the people ended up moving to Los Angeles. So now they're all the Los Angeles gang out there that are from Rochester. It just makes the world smaller, even in that way.
Where did the transition from this kind of producer, you had the band, the producer, mixing, production, studio stuff, and then going solo? Well, you had a band to start with, but going into the direction of the Plague, where was that transition?
It's a very complicated, messy way that I look at it to answer the question, so I'll try to make it concise. But I was producing a lot of bands, and maybe one of the best ways to describe it is I was writing all of their choruses. They would come in, a lot of people's goals were that they wanted songs that could be singles. And it was before the new era of streaming, so singles meant radio play and MySpace charting and some stuff like that. And I came from my mentor, Earl Cohen, who's a amazing engineer and producer in his own right. He had really encouraged me to keep looking at how songs went and all this stuff about start with the song, start with the chorus. Big and dumb is what he'd say. Big and dumb, make it big and dumb. Now, I started making things so big and dumb that I could see how effective that was, and it was really powerful. But I think it's possible to take that to the point where it's watered down and you're losing. Rather than it being a tool of effective communication, it's a pandering tool. And so, like, I'm very careful about helping artists figure out where they think that line is, and then also doing that for myself as well. Where is the line where I think like right now I'm rambling, and if I wanted to make a concise statement, I could probably make it a very simple, straightforward statement, and that still says what I want to say, but it's effective. And I think that Big and Dumb can be that type of thing. So because bands were looking for that but didn't have the skill set a lot of times, just because they hadn't practiced it very often, when we would collaborate, I would end up coming up with the chorus. I would end up telling them what their song was about, because I'd be, the most common thing. Oh my gosh, it's so funny. Hey, the most common mistake I'll say bands would make is they would come in with the whole song written, but they would have no vocals, and they'd want to track vocals just in the studio, like step up into the mic. And I'm like, do you have any lyrics? So we'd be trying to write lyrics. I'm like, dude, we really should have wrote the lyrics before we did all of this. So they would come and I'd be like, what lyrics you got? And what is the song about? Well, it's kind of about a guy who kind of feels like maybe this is happening in his life. I'm like, is the guy you? Like, who is the guy? Like, well, I guess so, I guess I did have this very significant event in my life that I was writing in the third person about. I'm like, let's write about that. That's what you're trying to get at, right? And so, I know that I'm being playful and slightly poking fun at it, but I think that there is something about human nature where sometimes it's easier to write about something that's slightly detached from our personal experience, and helping bands be like, process what they were going through and write about their actual experience turned out to be very powerful. I just felt like I was doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So then the bands would go and they would put as much work into their careers as they were putting into their songwriting, which is sort of like trying to skate by. And over time, I just felt like I loved helping bands express themselves. I just felt like I was doing so much of actually expressing my version of what they were like that um I was like, I think I'm better off doing my own thing and using, if I'm gonna write a chorus every day for a band, maybe it should be my band. And the other thing that I think is an important thing is that my dad got diagnosed with cancer, and around the time that I was thinking about stopping producing. And so it was kind of a decision where I was like, I'm going to move back in with my parents to write a record so I can spend time with my dad. And I moved back in with them in order to go through that phase of his life.
Wow. And I'm sure that led to more content to write about.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few songs on that first record that are about my relationship with my dad, for sure.
Klayton and I constantly refer to you as just a phenomenal songwriter. Every time you turn in a song for the Plague, we're blown away by the songwriting. And so it's interesting to hear some of the history of you flexing those muscles, working with other bands, and then like working with Earl.
Yeah.
And what shaped you to where you are now.
Well, I think there's a couple of very profound experiences that if anybody's watching and I could glean from my suffering, I'd love for them to be able to go write better music if it helps them. First of all, I really appreciate that immense compliment because I look up to you guys so immensely in this arena. There was a period where I told myself I was going to write a song a day, and at first, so for a year, and I ended up doing it. But at first, I went in writing songs that I already had kicking around in my head. So it was like, oh, let me lay down that. And eventually it became like, I got no ideas. I got to just generate something. So like, to me, writing a song or making a demo, the actual goal is to make a demo, not write a song. But a demo could have been a backwards reverb sample if that's all that came out that day. Just sit down, make something, and move on. And then there was one day where I had no ideas left. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to write the corniest song I've ever written. There was this list of things that whenever I'd make a song, I'm like, don't do that because that would suck. Don't do that because that would suck. Don't do that because that would suck. And I'm like, today I'm just going to do all those things as a joke. And it was the best song I'd ever written by a long shot. And I realized all the things I was trying to avoid. Where did I come up with these ideas of things to not be? And I was like, I'm pigeonholing myself so much. I was like, the chorus is just going to be an octave, da-na, and it's going to have the most stock chord progression, and it's going to have the most stock beat. That demo was the most impactful thing. And I was like, I've been avoiding being direct for so long because of all these weird goals that I don't even know where they came from. Like
that seems like a huge unlock, and
oh
I
my
hope
God.
that's an unlock for some other people that hear this.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Well, it's amazing how much fear can come into life and stopped me from accomplishing certain things that I didn't even know I was capable of. It's like now since that demo, I've made tons of demos that are really cheesy and stock and that I wouldn't listen to and that I don't like. But I think there's something very important about there's an a fun fact for anyone who's interested. I got my racing license, so I went to the Poconos and they train you on F2000 cars, and if I wanted to, I could go do trials to try to get into certain categories of races. I have a GT350 that I took to the racetrack and drove it as fast as I could. It's super fun. I have gone flying off the racetrack many times in dangerous weather. It's called going 4 off. I took my buddy Matt with me and we took turns driving my car on the racetrack and we both flew off the racetrack. He's like, I'm never doing that again. I almost hit another car one time. So I got my kicks from it. But the reason I'm sharing this is that there is Do you know how you find out what the maximum speed you can drive around a corner is?
Do not.
You go a little too fast and you fly off. And
Guess that would do it.
yeah, and that just stuck with me as sort of like a spiritual metaphor in that way. It's like, for engineers out there, a technique is where you sweep EQ, where you go, maybe you're sweeping the amount of gain on it. You go, that's not bright enough. That's too bright. And then you find where you like it. So not enough, too much. And I think that in music, you can do the same thing where you sweep a concept until you see where you fly off the track, see where's too slow, where you can definitely push it harder. And I find that the sweet spot for things is I like to start really, really simple and kind of cheesy and maybe too watered down, find the essence of things, and then push it until you fly off the track and then go, okay, well, this is the amount of play I have, and then sort of sort through what the most effective things are in that window.
That's really fascinating. I think that's really, a, a trick to share for sure. That could be an unlock for people.
Yeah, you find yourself in that process because everyone's going to have a different opinion about what too busy is, what too simple is. Even with lyrics, what too direct is. Another thing that I saw, because I got to see all these bands work through processes and grow in the studio. So like another thing you'd see is people would really good lyricists, very clever people who would sit there with a pad and they would I'd be like, oh, you're working on lyrics, cool, and then I'd be recording guitars or whatever. I'd come back 2 hours later, nothing on the pad. They're still sitting there, and I'm like, you see them go, oh, and then go to write it down and go, no, nope, and they're criticizing themselves. They feel like they have to write the lyrics in order from the beginning to end, and they have to be perfect, and you have to like literally write the song rather than just writing garbage and seeing what's good and what's bad. And I would be like, what's holding you back? Like, what are you processing? And the most common answer was, it's not clever enough. I need something more clever. And it took me a while to figure out how to express, because it was so consistent. I needed something to say. But eventually I came up with, maybe you're not clever. And if you're not clever, it's going to come out as just being someone trying to be clever. And if you are clever, you're not going to need to try. You just write and it's clever. But maybe you're direct. Maybe you're sincere. Maybe you're something that's not clever. Like, where is this idea? You just write, and whatever you write will be you. And now if you write stuff that you don't like, that's good. Now you have a direction to go in. You can say, what don't I like about it? And at least go in somewhere. But to start with self-criticizing and pigeonholing is a very tough place with not a lot of wiggle room. I like the idea of parachuting out of the plane, landing somewhere on the island, and you know where you need to go, but you just needed to land somewhere so you have a direction to go in rather than needing to land right in the spot you're trying to get to. You got a journey to go to get there, but at least you landed on the island. At least you got something going on. Let's just make some stuff and move it towards, discovering what the song wants to be and who we are as people, I guess.
I love it. And you are clever. And I love your lyrics, and it's cool to see some of the process that you have gone through to how you process these things. That's very cool.
Yeah, something that I think is a double-edged sword. I come from a very bizarre family. My grandfather was an inventor, and he invented the spacesuit, the princess telephone, the delete key on a typewriter, so like ink, the white out ink, and a few other things that were fitted bed sheets. That was another thing that he invented. So I didn't know him very well, but I've heard that he was at the top of the Mensa list and that he would obsessively check every day to see if someone knocked him off so like this sort of like scientific obsessive thing. And the older I get, the more I see that potentially I have that kind of brain when it comes to making music, because I like things to be I like to have a process that's very technical, so that once that's all set, it frees me up to be very emotional and then sensitive, and sort of like the process automates itself. So that's the scientific part. And the marriage between the emotional and scientific is something I'm still all the time just trying to figure out, how can I improve that marriage.
But you're doing well at it. Again, the emotion, that a couple of the new songs that are not released yet, Living in the Past. What's the next one called? I'm gonna
Clean
blank.
slate.
Clean Slate. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
listened to the latest version of that.
Yeah.
Super emotional, both of those tracks, like profound. Love it.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's mostly the byproduct of suffering. It's been a really, really, really tough period in my life, harder than I thought life could be, for many reasons. And I think just trying not to get in the way of that when I'm making the music. I just try to say like what actually says what I like. If I was alone and I was just being honest with myself, or if I was just talking to someone when I was just trying to get it out, like what would I say?
Yeah. I mean, that's
Sometimes
super vulnerable, and
yeah.
want to acknowledge you for like putting that out there.
Well, the cool thing is, and actually this is something that I'm kind of working through at the moment. I don't really have the strongest opinion, but I've been studying a couple of different songwriters who say that the more specific you make the song, it might seem like it alienates people, but they feel connected to it because they can picture very acutely what the person writing it is, and because of that, connect it to their own experience. I tend to be
Yeah.
someone who, I don't write a song unless I know exactly what it is for me, and then I try to make it in a way that someone else could connect it to their own experience. So there's a little bit of sweeping the play of the song to like how literal versus how vague. Where does the strength of the song lie in that kind of thing? And yeah, to try to bridge the experience to how general versus how specific to make it is kind of fun to explore with some of these, with these new songs.
Yeah. Well, we're loving it, and I can't wait for fans to hear what you're currently working on.
I'm
Um,
curious. Yeah.
let's go back, and I want to ask, from your perspective, where did where and how did Fixed first come on your radar, or even more specifically, Klayton and what he was doing as Cell Dweller, and if you can share a little bit of the story of how we first interacted.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a fun story because I had a assistant start working for, okay, well, he came through with his band actually. Um Man, sorry, I'm hesitating because I'm like, do I name all these people? It's the son of a Persian pop star. So
Well,
they call the Persian pop star the Persian Bruce Springsteen. It was his son's band. And they doing like Rick Springfield kind of stuff. It was a really fun project, actually. Good singer, and I that was another band where I like co-wrote a lot of the music. But the guitar player, he was going to Berklee College School of Music to be an engineer. Spoiler alert, later bought my studio from me and then had a #1 rap album that he produced,
whoa.
which is just amazing for him. So he showed me, I was showing him how to do a couple things because he was super curious. That's why eventually he ended up being working at the studio, because he just had this passion for being between the speakers. And he's like, oh, how do you do that? Can you? And I was cutting some vocals up and doing some stutter edits, which was trendy at the time. But and he's like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And then he's like, it reminds me, stutter edits remind me of this artist that I heard, Cell Dweller, that my friend turned me on to. And he's like, and so he started playing it to show me all the production techniques. And I just thought it was so cool. Not only that, but I was starting to think about the plague. So I was like, I thought it was so interesting that you guys were releasing 3 songs at a time. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory is that this was very early in the transition to streaming, so it wasn't yet like a model that's relevant quite yet. You were trying to bridge the gap between the
Yeah.
2 stages, and it was just so cool to see that you had that hat on and it was working.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah. Clay really had this vision early on for, instead of fans having to wait, 3-4 years or like a ridiculously long amount of time between albums, like give them a couple tracks along the way, and each, like, we were doing 2 tracks and with some bonus tracks. There may have been 3 or 4, but like 2 main songs, instrumentals, maybe some remixes, but a little pack.
yeah,
And then you could do a whole merch drop. It'd almost be like this whole mini album experience, but it was like the transition from full album to more the single bass strategy that is happening now. But it was like this intermediary piece.
yeah,
And yeah, like 2008 or something.
that seems right. Yeah, which is I just think had such cool intuition from you guys, because not only do I think that it was a good decision from how you described it, but also attention spans were shifting, so that it's like that seems like such an appropriate transition. I remember around that time I started listening through the first chorus of a song being like, I like this song, and then I would only listen to the first 30 seconds, and I got other stuff to do. The internet's taken up my time, and it's like there's a lot to get through. So I like the idea of trying to grab people with smaller bursts of attachment. I thought that was super cool. So eventually my assistant told me that you guys were looking for a studio engineer. Is that right? It was an
Yep.
engineer? It was
Yep.
like an assistant. So like
Yep.
he told me, hey, if you want to do the job I'm doing for you for Cell Dweller, there's this job opportunity. So we touched base about it. We had a little bit of a back and forth, but I did have some opportunities with the studio, and also then the transition with my father. There was a lot going on at the time. So we sort of shook hands about it and had a nice interaction. And then years later, when we were releasing the Plague material, I just thought of you guys because we took so much inspiration between the futuristic synths. I was putting on Louder Than Words as a reference, like a lot when making the Plague music. I had one friend who called it producer rock, and that's like totally what it felt like to me. Like it just grabbed my producer brain so hard. And then that you guys also released it on your own label, and that you were doing all the stuff. I mean, it was futuristic and edgy, and it was cool. There were so many things that we modeled after what we were doing from you guys. So I was like, hey James, check it out. Like almost like a little brother being like, yo, check it out, I'm doing music too. And that was the start of us seriously talking at the time.
Yeah. I remember, I forgot about when we had interacted the years prior about the like studio engineer assistant position for Klayton.
Yeah.
And it was only actually recently in the last couple of years after, we signed together and working together that you reminded me of that. And then I found that email. I still have the email from like over a decade ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember how you first reached out about sharing the music. You just described you must have reached out and shared it, but I didn't remember the previous interaction. But I remember we heard the Hope for the Future album, and we were like blown away, and just the catchiness, the songwriting, loved the material. And I know we were evolving as a label and considering what artists to work with. And I think we might have explored a little bit if we could have done something, and it didn't work out initially, but then we reached out about having you do a remix for Circle of Dust.
Yeah.
Or maybe that was right before. It was around that time.
It was around that time, yeah. I
Yeah.
think some of it's just a little like overlappy, so it's hard to say when the start and finish of things were, but yeah, around
But
that time.
what you did on that remix for Embracing Entropy for the Circle of Dust Machines of Our Disgrace album, that blew us away. And like, okay,
Oh, dope. It's
this
super
guy isn't
fun.
just remixing what's here. Like, you reproduced things. You like, you were tracking new instruments and like turned it into basically a plague track that was a version of a remix. But yeah, so we've just been super impressed. And then for several years there, we kept kind of like connecting, missing each other. Maybe we should do something. But super excited that we finally worked something out, and we're able to re-release that first album, and
Yeah.
now into the middle of a new album from the ground up, and just really enjoying all the time that we've got to work together, and get to know you better as a person as well.
Yeah, the feeling's mutual.
Well, let's go to a little somewhere different. I wanted to ask you what, and this could be currently, this could be, something over the last few years, but what inspires you?
So I was curious before this if I could get the questions. Because this is the type of thing where, do I have 20 minutes to stare off into space for a second? Man, it's just okay. It's a very good question. It's just so existential in some ways. My knee-jerk reaction is to say the Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, who lives inside me and guides me. God inspires me. What if you believe in God? I've spent more of my life not believing in God than believing in God. And I can tell you, since I believe in God, that's the most inspiring thing that there could be if that's my paradigm. It's like that's the pinnacle. So God, and what God does in people's lives, and what the truth of reality is the most inspiring thing to me. But I guess some of it depends on what the definition of inspire is. If we're saying
Yeah,
like,
that's totally valid. And yeah, we've had many conversations. I know how important God is, and
yeah,
that side of things for you. Do you watch a lot of film? Are you inspired by movies?
hmm.
I know you game some. Are there types of media and things that like drive inspiration that then leads to musical, inspiration, or is that a thread that kind of ties together?
Hmm. I think it's changed over different periods in my life. Uh, I used to be super inspired by like John Feldman productions. I was very inspired by uh, Klayton's work and Cell Dweller and stuff like that. There's been a lot of musical influences but maybe it's how the internet's developed to some degree, but somehow I end up watching YouTube videos about people talking about making music more than I watch music. So there's a sense of like, I like hearing what inspires people and about people's hearts. I would say that the most inspiring things to me, if I'm going to give you a practical answer, it's my relationships with friendships and people I love, and us collaborating about our triumphs and our struggles, and knowing that I'm not alone, and knowing the details of what makes other people get up and fight another day, and the hurdles they're trying to overcome. I think
Yeah.
that perseverance is probably what is one of the most inspiring things. It's a lot of what I'm trying to put into music is sort of like, hey, God has a purpose and a plan for me, and if for the next half hour it's searching through snare drums for whichever one hits the best in this song, then and if I can't figure it out, and I'm like, okay, well, I have some people I can lean on, or I can go watch videos about snare drums for a half hour. It's sort of like, that's the stuff that's inspiring. Can I be persistent to explore and find more solutions and keep growing. And I think I need role models in that way. So I watch a lot of philosophy videos. I watch a lot of politics. Like almost to the point where I've been watching less politics because I watch so much politics. Yep. So yeah, I would say current events and the reality of people struggling and persevering, and philosophy and even history to some degree.
Very cool.
Is that the type of answer you were looking for?
Hey, no, there's no right or wrong answer. No, thanks for sharing that. Are there any music producers that you're, fan of that you want to recognize?
I mean, oh my gosh, yeah. There's so many people to give. First of all, I don't think I can remember everybody that's been in all the FiXT calls lately. But like all of the artists that I've had the pleasure of experiencing on the FiXT roster, one of the coolest things for those of you who don't know is that FiXT puts together these calls where we all get to hang out and get to know each other, and also like compare notes and play each other our songs. And every single time it's just such a boost of adrenaline to go focus in on stuff. There's so many cool sounds people are making and so much cool music that I'm like wanting to go back into the lab and figure out how to mix the chemicals just the right way to get that type of thing that's going on, So I haven't met a FiXT artist that I don't like. haven't met one. I mean, like, I listen to a lot of John Feldman, a lot of Joey Sturgis. I've been getting into Daniel Braunstein lately, and then there's also Buster Oheim, specifically because he does a lot of MIDI drums, and that's like a lot of the world that we're in these days. And so I find his stuff to be really inspiring. The tough thing for me about being inspired by producers, I mean, Howard Benson is probably one of my favorite producers of all time. Mutt Lange, some Butch Vig. I really like a lot of 90s music as far as producers, because what it felt like at the time was that they were getting into, they'd go see a band live. David Bendeth is another one that does this really well. You go see a band live, and then you would capture them doing that. I mean, Steve Albini. Oh my gosh, right? Like, hey, let me not get in the way at all. Let me just capture exactly what this band's like. There was some of the 90s where you're also importing a little of your style. Mutt Lange he does all these different styles, but you can tell there's a little bit more 4 on the floor drums. There's a little bit certain drum style for a lot of Mutt Lange records that he imparts, whether it be AC/DC or Shania Twain, but then there became the digital revolution, and much like it was affecting the promotion and sales and ways that consumers were interacting with bands, let alone getting the music, there was the sense of digital production became so popular that it became a thing where now bands wouldn't sound like bands. They'd sound like bands filtered through the producer. It wasn't about the producer capturing them live. It's about the band fitting into the template that the producer has. So now you have all these producers exploding because their template is what people want to listen to. Like, when I think of Joey Sturgis, I think of a producer very much like that, where it's like, you want to hear a Joey record, and it's like the band's filtered through Joey. Not to take anything away from the bands, but it's more the collaboration is what. And so then bands would start to be like, we got to make a record with that guy. Not necessarily because they wanted that guy to capture what they did in a room, but because they wanted to take their ideas and filter it through the producer's lens, be filtered by their thing. So the reason that's interesting is, as a self-producing artist, I am not very good at getting filtered through someone else's filter. Like, I don't actually, so I'll study someone and I'll get a really good grasp on what their template's like and their process and stuff, and then I'll just I did this for a while. I'd inject my music into their template, and I'd be like, this doesn't work. This doesn't work for me. It
Yeah.
would work. It would work for another artist who wants to get filtered through that, or like if I wrote for the template, maybe that would work. But I'm trying to figure out how to make my own thing for me, and then I'm also all over the place. I'll do like pop or then metal or whatever. So as much as I there's tons of producers I want to give shout outs to, it's not a one size fits
Yeah.
all often, and I tend to be a bit more inspired by producers that get out of the way of the artist and supplement where it needs to be and help put, it's almost like everything's a new project rather than everything's a new opportunity to see how your sound shines with a different artist, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And yet even just you describing that makes sense to some of the interactions we've had with some of the music we've, seen you working through and finding not the literal voice, but like the tone of how you want things to turn out and
Totally.
working with different guys. Um, so that makes total sense.
Yeah, and sometimes I wonder if it would be helpful to have less of an opinion about certain things, because then there would be a lot more flexibility. I tend to not be so picky about the details from a technical perspective, but definitely from an emotional perspective. Like, and it's to the point where it can be hard for me to collaborate with people on my own material. I have a very, very easy time collaborating with people on their material because I'm not invested on that level. Those aren't my decisions. If I'm just helping someone walk through, hey, so what do you think of
Yeah.
this? Oh, so you have more of this opinion. Well, I don't know what I think about this. Well, let me give you some options. Which do you like out of these? We could do this or this or this. And they're like, it's almost like window shopping with someone and watching them discover what they like or helping them accomplish their goals. That's very fun and rewarding. But when it's me with me doing that, uh, I haven't had very many experiences of someone wanting to come in and walk me through like, hey, I can give you all these options. It's normally someone being like, here's my option, I'll give you. And sometimes that can hit right on the money, but there's music is so complicated. There's so many different variables that for someone to just hit all of the things for me, it's impossible. It's just impossible for someone to
Yeah.
do. It's impossible for me to do. I'm sitting here trying still.
Well, it's coming together. We're super excited again about all the material. Um, while we've got a little bit of time left, there's a couple other questions I wanted to get to.
Sure.
And you've referenced a bit already in some of the conversation, some of the journey, some of the, the kind of trial and tribulations that you've gone through and the emotions that are coming out in the music. I think one of the reasons I'm excited to have you on and talk with you here is, while we've been working together, you haven't really been on camera and interacting directly with the fans the way that you have in some previous years. And
Yeah.
you've had, some trials that you've gone through. And to whatever extent you're willing to talk about that in any generalities or with any specificity,
Yeah.
would just be curious if you're open to sharing anything about what you've been going through. But I hope anybody that's watching this that's a FiXT fan or a fan of the Plague already can just appreciate getting to know you a little more here through this conversation and some of your personality coming through. Because we have enjoyed so much of that. I know the roster, when we do those artist roster calls, every other roster artist, when they get on and interact with you, I can tell they all respect you, that they appreciate what you're doing. And even though fans get to hear the final music, there is something about your personality coming through in interactions like this that um, I want fans to get more of that experience, because it just deepens the appreciation for the music for me.
Okay. I'm overwhelmed by how many things you just said there. What an honor. I'm like wanting to wrap my head around it. I I accept what you're saying, and I just feel overwhelmed with gratitude. So that's very sweet of you. I hope I can live up to the hype.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
no pressure.
with no pressure. Dang. So is the question what's some of the suffering? Was that some of the
Yeah, what part of the journey of what you've been going through personally over the last few years that you would want to touch on or share about just what you've been going through that is coming through in some of the music or
Yeah. Well, uh I suppose the most concise answer is that I almost died of a drug overdose. I melted my face to the point where I couldn't breathe, and I've over the past 3 years have had 9 reconstructive surgeries to uh they removed my rib and put it in my face. Uh I've been having surgery so often that I can't that I'm taking a year off from surgery this year to turn in more music and spend more time in the studio, but also to just get back in shape. I've got 50 pounds that I'm looking to lose and a few other things, but I would say that the most difficult thing was seeing my shortcomings for coping for some things. Around when COVID happened, I was just getting through losing the band in the sense that it was at the time. Christ came into my life in a very powerful way where he appeared before me. He told me all of this stuff that was in the Bible that I didn't know. Like I could go look in the Bible and it was the stuff that this spirit told me. When I accepted Christ, I felt my spirit come alive in eternity, and that the Holy Spirit started to dwell inside me. And ever since then, I've had a connection with God. I don't control it. I can't just always go like, hey, God, give me the answer and tell me the future right now. He tells me what he wants, but like a permanent connection that has carried me through so many different things. And the downside of that is that I've also been aware of how Satan, on the other hand, is trying to take me out. So the first thing he tried to do was kill me through a drug overdose. I regret that I did not have the coping skills that I needed at the time. I come from a very small family of only children. And then my mom's side, she's adopted. So we come from a very, very small family. And all in a row, everyone except for my mom passed away. And a lot of things changed in life. Around then was when we were hitting the limits of what my plan for the band was able to accomplish. And when Christ came into my life in such a powerful way, it created a rift in the band to a large degree. And I thought that it was the best to part ways with to try to create a situation that was more compatible with what I felt God was telling me to do at the time. So after that all of that grinded to a halt, I was kind of just left with the grief of my family. I was left with the grief of my music career. I was left with the grief of my closest relationships. And I was left with this sense of needing to trust this relationship with God that I didn't have very much experience leaning on. And I had to lean everything on that. And through some bizarre circumstances, drugs came into the picture. And the battle for my soul, I mean, like, Christ had already won this battle for my spirit in eternity, but the battle for me to be alive on this planet started. And the entire time that I was abusing drugs and God was telling me, like, hey, I'm keeping your heart beating right now because I still got more stuff for you to do. I was at times doing drugs while reading my Bible at the same time, like literally torn between two worlds. And COVID hit, and that was like a time where it's like totally appropriate for everyone to isolate. And I barely survived. So I also I lost very important relationships in my life because of the drug abuse. And I think that the most important thing that I do want to say is that before this, my music career, I felt like the whole point in me making music was to encourage people. Hope for the future is trying to give people hope for the future.
Yeah.
There's songs about unconditional love, or about it's okay to be angry as long as you do stuff that's constructive with it, and it's okay to be yourself, and there's nothing wrong with you. And through this process of spiritual warfare, I've realized how much those are good messages that I still stand by, because I felt like God was the one that was presenting them to me to as a purpose-driven thing to do. But I've had a lot of naivety in my life. I was oversimplifying a lot of aspects of myself in order to feel like I'm a good person, when I'm a mixed bag. And there's something about suffering and a near-death experience. And, I'm sober now. I've got 4 years coming up soon.
Congrats, man.
Thanks. And there's something about getting your rib removed and put in your face and having permanent scars on my body, where every time I wake up from a surgery and I see the scars on my body, I think about the scars that I've put in relationships by, I would say, naivety, but also like huge blind spots that I've had. I think I'm definitely working on forgiving myself, and that's what a lot of this music that I'm putting out is about. But I think that it's tough to, the thing is, like, I didn't know what I didn't know, and it just sucks. I think every person needs to have beliefs that they hold in order to function in life. You need to believe that when you go to work, you're going to be able to put food on the table. You need to believe that X, Y, and Z. You can't function if you can't trust anything that's ever happening. So we all come up with these ideas that enable us to function. And I've wanted to be someone who people could count on, and who people felt like they were loved, accepted, and encouraged by experiencing. And to see how far I've fallen from that, when I felt like God really presented me with a lot of opportunities to fulfill that, I have a lot of regrets around that. I'm trying to, the best I can do is put that into music now.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing that. That, is very deep, personal, vulnerable. But acknowledge you for sharing that and your truth. I think the message in your music, from the first album, the lyrics and the message on those songs, to the things that you're writing now, are songs of connection and hope. And for people that are going through similar feelings, music can be that connection that helps them realize, I'm not the only person feeling this way, which gives them hope.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so you are connecting, you're touching lives and connecting to people through your music. And yeah, I appreciate that you are continuing to do that, and not just staying silent.
Well, regardless of if there's vanity metrics with like huge numbers on the internet that say that, and number one charting songs and all that stuff, there's a trend of like, I do get personal DMs of people saying that the song helped them through something, and that actually is what all of this is about.
Yeah.
There's a sense of the best thing about suffering is that the best thing about suffering is that I feel like it not only gives wisdom, but it enables you to connect with people about suffering. And I definitely used to be the kind of person that if someone was depressed, I'd be like, you got to pick yourself up from your bootstraps. You can do it. That's a hopeful message, right? You can do it. And now if I meet someone who's depressed, I'm like, I get it. Let me just be with you for a sec. You know, it's so important to just feel connected as much as it is to feel encouraged. Connection is encouraging.
Yeah.
You know, to be accepted.
And a lot of these themes also, feel like something that I resonate with is just, self-awareness, self-discovery, and finding those blind spots and working on yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, being easy on yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like, what I feel like I could play devil's advocate against every idea I have in my head all the time. There's this sense of how living with the discomfort of wanting to move forward. You need the discomfort to go somewhere. If you were comfortable, you just stay in the same spot. And there's the sense of like, if I get there, I'll resolve the discomfort. Maybe, but you'll also come up with something else to be uncomfortable about. And would you rather have no motivation? Oh my gosh. So there's all these people. It's like, oh man, I'm in the middle of working through this. Well, if you did this, you'd be comfortable. It's like, I don't actually want to be comfortable though. That's not my goal. My goal is to be comfortable being uncomfortable, I guess, or to accept the discomfort,
Yeah.
Like, sure, you eat and then you're like, yeah, I'm not hungry right now, but I hope you get hungry again because you're going to need to eat again.
Yeah. Metaphor for life. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you spending some time sharing with us, and really hope that fixed fans that have been listening to your music already, that maybe already know you, can just feel a little more connected to you through this, and seeing, the person that you are. And yeah, I hope we can do this again, and that the next, year with this time off, that you're taking from the surgeries and working on music, that is very healthy for you to put that out there and get into that phase.
Yeah. I mean, something that I'd like to say as I get the sense that we're wrapping up here, I'd like to say that to everybody who is a fan of FiXT or is a fan of the Plague, you're definitely the reason why I make music at all. And I've been wanting to connect more with the fan base and have it be more interactive. If anyone wants to reach out about the type of content that they'd like to see or anything like that, because of the health stuff, I haven't been doing some of the interactions that I'd like to, but in the next year, I am hoping to be more available and be more interactive. And I just want to express that I'm so grateful that you exist and that you're out there every time we release a song. And there's even a comment that says, I like listening to this. It gives me so much fuel to get back in the studio and sit between the speakers again and make something else. I wish there was, I'm going to be looking for ways to try to bridge the reactions of the fans and then the investment into giving the people what they want.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, we're excited to be part of this journey with you, and work with you here. So we're championing you, but from this side, and I know there are fans that love what you're doing. So we'll keep pushing things out.
Cool. I'm grateful for you, James. I'm grateful for FiXT, and I'm grateful for, man, anybody who felt that this was worth watching. That's awesome.